Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Iridescence Wash Carbonic Macerated Processed Panama from the Picky Chemist. And there's the bag right there. And the Picky Chemist, based out of Chaudfontaine, Belgium. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel multiple times before. And once again, a coffee roaster that's extremely popular with you guys, as they were once the most requested coffee roaster we had ever had on this channel. So naturally, a lot of people told me about these Savage coffees when they were released, and I did reach out to the owner about the timing of these coffees, as they happened to coincide with our Japan trip. But luckily for me, I was able to get our hands on both this one, as well as the natural coffee. So we will be reviewing them in back-to-back reviews, beginning with this one today, as this right here is day 47. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which typically indicates a more medium fine grind, but as has been the consistent theme with the Picky Chemist coffees that we've had in the past, this one did require a more fine grind than normal, as we went 2 notches more fine to indicate that you have to go a little bit more fine with this coffee as well. Now, roast profile for the Picky Chemist, they are one of the lightest roasting coffee roasters in the entire world, and even with a little bit of processing in this coffee, you can definitely tell that it skews on the very light side of the spectrum, which is to say that this is an extremely light coffee by most standards and metrics. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 22, first impression, and we opted for the V60 and instantly noticed the immense delicacy that was present within this cup, as it was one of the most delicate, lighter bodied and lighter profiled coffees that we've ever reviewed on this channel. In addition to that, it wasn't necessarily completely clean, as there was an ever so slight fermentiness to the cup that began skewing a little bit in the dark profiled florality within the finish. There's a little bit of fresh stone fruit and some notable sweetness as well with this sugary aspect to it. So there were some positives I picked up from this first impression, but for the most part, it was a kind of interesting coffee, somewhat in line with our previous experiences from this roaster. But we continue on to day 25, as we ran it through the Chemex, and the delicacy continues to be at the forefront, as there are slight shades of the processing in play within the aroma itself. It's notably less present within the cup, as there's an ever so slight grainy quality and a light body to an otherwise citric bergamot-like cup, with more of that darker profiled florality. So, been interesting. We continue on to day 29, as we opted for the April brewer, and this was a much better day, as it was much more in line with the classic washed Panamanian geisha characteristics in terms of the floral profile, with a slight honeysuckle-like aspect and much more of the listed peachiness, in addition to a lot of those sugary aspects, most specifically associated with the peachiness of the cup. Still not completely clean, as there's an ever so slight graining quality, but much more of the citric aspects are present within the cup, so overall, a much better experience. We continue on to day 34, back through the V60 with higher temperatures and a little bit more fine on the grind. That seems to be the normal adjustments, and it's much better. So that's what I continued to notice about their coffees, is continuing to make those adjustments were yielding some positive results, as there's notably less of the graininess. Though interestingly for me, it was still present in the aroma, and that's something that I did want to make noted within these notes themselves. A little bit of a defined and prominent bergamot citric aspect to the cup. The white peach did make sense, though it was an ever so slightly fermenty sense, as it's lingering and lasting within the finish, but it's also a little bit more on the sugary side of things. Day 37, same adjustments to the Chemex, and there was a bit more graininess present, as it continues to feel slightly better through the V60. The listed bergamot is much more well defined in this brew method, as I've noticed, though it's not necessarily something that I'm seeking in abundance. Strong, darker profiled florality as well. Honey is quite prominent, as the cup does have some nice depth, a little bit of this lingering finish in terms of the fermenty stone fruits once again. So that's been a little bit of a theme, something that I haven't necessarily enjoyed too much about this coffee. We continue on to day 40, back through the V60 with the higher temperatures, and the cup was back to its best, as it's offering much more of the classic washed Panamanian geisha profile with slightly less clarity in place of a notable citric grain quality to it. There's a little bit of a light floral complexion as well, and so much more of the listed bergamot aspect, so I was able to get that in a little bit more definition through this brew method on this day. Much better in general, as that was the best day I had up to that point. Day 43, same recipe, and I felt like it was improving with time as there's a bit more clarity and vibrancy all around, a better defined peachiness in the cup, and an ever so slight what I described as aloe vera with a little bit of the citric herbality. So a lot of improvement in general. Here on day 47, I am noticing a little bit more improvement, and that's something I've also heard about the Picky Chemist's coffees, is that you will continue to see improvement, though it does kind of plateau somewhere around the day 60, day 70 mark. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s. So let's go through those, and we will start with the cleanliness level 4. I feel like that's one of the most important notes in this coffee, and it's because I kept harping on the slight grainy quality as well as the fermenty aspect to it. That being said, it was delicate, and at times it did offer enough clarity to justify that level 4 mark. It was never going to score a level 5. I don't necessarily, well, if I'm being completely honest, I do think the processing had a little bit to do with the overall results of it, as I would fully expect something like this and just a straight wash processing to have that level 5. Though it's been very interesting for me with Savage's coffees, as we've reviewed a couple of them on this channel, and that seems to be a theme, is that I can never really seem to get those coffees at the level 5 or clarity. So that's in line with a couple of the expectations I had for it, though I was really hoping it would reach that level 5 mark. Finish, level 4. That's to kind of say that at no parts did I ever find the fermenty aspects to it, the grainy aspects to it, to be overly long lasting or dominating the cup in any regard, as they seemed to finish in a much more even sense. At times a little bit more of the floral side of things, and at times a little bit more of the fruit side of things, specifically that white peachiness to it. So level 4 seems to be a good place for that. Sweetness, level 4. Yeah, so I might have been a little generous in terms of the sweetnesses. This one right here, once again, continues to be in line with a lot of the coffees that we've had from the Picky Chemist. When it comes to any other washed coffees, it's extremely hard for me to justify and push them up to that level 4, as I oftentimes kind of compare them along some much more sweet coffees that we do review. This one right here, maybe on the slightly lower side of the level 4, but I said there's enough of that kind of sugary sweetness to this cup that it'll justify that level 4 mark, so I opted for it. Keep that in mind, slightly lower side of that. Acidity, level 4. There was a fair bit of brightness from this one throughout, and it's entirely possible that the roast profile of this one had a lot to do with that. I might have been a little surprised, not always a theme with a lot of Panamanian geishas to have that much brightness to it, but there was a fair bit of it within this coffee. If I recall correctly, I might have made this alongside of the tasting wheel for the Kenyan coffee. Nonetheless, it did score on the higher side of things, indicating there was a fair bit of brightness within this one. Florality, level 4. I do have to say that that was one of the most consistent and enjoyable things about this coffee, for me anyway. At times, I kind of mentioned in the earlier days, there was a little bit of that darker profiled florality, but in addition to that, there was a little bit more of that jasmine-like aspect. So, correction, honeysuckle-like aspect to it. So those things were quite positive for me, as I did appreciate the florality within this one. Pretty nice in that regard. Citrus fruit, level 4. That's another thing that I kept mentioning, was the bergamot. So it was that slightly herbal kind of spice-like attribute that I think a lot of people like to describe bergamot as. For me, at times, one of the most defining and important characteristics of this coffee. So it reached that level 4. I don't think it was overbearing in any sense. I've said before, a lot of Café Circular's coffees can have that quality be dominant within the cup. Level 4 seems like a good place for it. Stone fruit, level 4. So this one for me wasn't necessarily like an overly fresh fruit peachiness that I typically get with, we'll say, a combination of Ethiopian coffees and Panamanian coffees. This one right here was a little bit more of that sugary stone fruit, as I kept alluding to, that more sugary white peach aspect, as white peach can be much more sugary tasting than a lot of those regular peaches. So that's why I think that it scored in that mark, though at times, as I mentioned, it could be ever so slightly fermenting. Then we have a couple of level 3s. We will start with the body level 3. That's an interesting one for me, and I'm not entirely sure how that played into this coffee, whether it be the processing, as that's probably my best bet for a Panamanian geisha. I fully expect that to score 1, maximum 2. So this one had a little bit more body and texture to it than I was probably expecting, and it reached that level 3 mark. Spice, level 3. Yes, and I'd mentioned before that the bergamot wasn't like overly long lasting. I mentioned at times there was a little bit of a just kind of herbality to it in a spice-like sense. In addition to that, there was that kind of like aloe vera taste towards the end. So spice did seem to play a role in this one, and that's why it scores at that level 3 mark. Berry fruit, level 3. yeah, as I'm kind of looking back at that, I think it's one of those things where I was picking up slight traces of it, never enough to the point where I noted it within our notes themselves, but enough to justify that level 3 mark. I am wondering if in hindsight it might have been a slight fermenty berry aspect to it. As mentioned, it wasn't necessarily the most clean Panamanian geisha, but level 3 mark is where we placed it nonetheless. Savoriness, level 3, I do think that once again goes back to that kind of spice-like quality that was present within this coffee, as that seemed to play a role in it. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. I just think that this coffee was maybe a little different from what I was expecting. So my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I do need to start with this. When it comes to pretty much any non-natural or more processed than natural Panamanian geisha, I am always hoping for the level 5 in terms of clarity, but I do have to say that this has been a little bit more in line with my experiences with Savage's coffees, as even a straight washed Panamanian geisha that we've reviewed from them in the past hasn't necessarily scored that level 5 for clarity. So I think that's going to be the biggest sticking point to me on this coffee, as we did get a little bit of a grainy as well as fermenty quality to it, though that did seem to dissipate with more time. So that's to say that this coffee did improve with some adjustments and some time in general, but those things are always going to be a little bit of a difficult sell to me when it comes to Panamanian geishas as a whole. That being said, there were some really nice things about this coffee, most specifically the sugary aspect to it. There was an interesting florality as well as some depth and complexity overall. So I did pull away a lot of positive things from this one, but right from the start, if I'm not getting that level 5, it's always just going to be a little bit more tricky of a review in that regard. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I think with any of the Picky Chemist's coffees, I do need to start at this spot, and that's extremely light profiled coffees, as once again, couldn't help but notice the lightness of this one right at the very forefront of it. And that at times made it a little bit tricky, as it didn't necessarily offer the most defining profile right at the start. It did take a fair bit of adjustments to seem to get this one right for me, though I felt like I was on the right track towards the end. In addition to that, some of these interesting kind of spice-like qualities to it did give it a little bit more depth and characteristic that aren't necessarily found in a lot of these Panamanian geishas in general. So those are the places I would start. Keep in mind as well some nice sugary aspects to it, most specifically in that stone fruits direction, as well as the citric profile and some nice florality as well. I think those things together would probably be an ideal fit for you on this one, but I think it's the best way I can leave this review. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Iridescence Wash Carbonic Macerated Processed Panama from the Picky Chemist. Thank you for watching.